Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our No Hate in the Hammer event. My name is Gashi. I will be delivering the land acknowledgement for today. So, No Hate in the Hammer is situated in what we now know as Hamilton. It is the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and it is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which stipulates that this land is a dish and that we must kind of share it with one spoon. I think it's also important that as we reflect on intersections of hate and how to fight hate, that we also implement the 7 generations principle, that the work we're doing now is also work that will last for 7 generations to come. And as I say this land acknowledgement, I admit I say it from memory. I say it kind of like a routine because land acknowledgements have become so ingrained in our day-to-day practices, but it doesn't have any sort of meaning attached to it. You know, what does it mean when we acknowledge that the land that we are on is belongs to the original inhabitants of this land, and yet we're not doing anything to fight against the colonization of this land, to ensure that our community members are respected and have justice. We'll talk about it kind of throughout this conversation, but recently and kind of in the media, we've really kind of talked about encampments, encampment displacing, and lack of affordable housing. But again, like who are we centering in these conversations? Are we centering Indigenous people? You know, is evicting people also a part of an Indigenous lens as well? And that's something that we should question and really understand. And so I hope that we kind of use this spirit as we continue with our event today.
Thank you, Gashi, for centering our work in decolonization and anti-racism and helping us to really bring a good mind and a good heart to today's session. It's very important for us to do this and to acknowledge our shared role in reconciliation and building an inclusive and safe community. Welcome, everyone, again. And my name is Kim Martin. I am a member of No Hate in the Hammer Steering Committee. I'm also the Executive Director of the Social Planning and Research Council of Hamilton. And it really is my pleasure to be here with you today, co-moderating this event with you and with our tremendous panelists who you will soon meet. And I do have a co-conspirator who has introduced herself, but I will turn it over to her so she can also let you know a little bit about who she is and her role. So over to you again, Gashi.
Hi, everyone. Hi again. So my name is Gashi Issa. I'm also a member of the No Hate in the Hammer Steering Committee. I'm also the Black Justice Coordinator at the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic. I'm so happy to join Kim as a moderator for this important event. Et pour la communauté francophone, bienvenue à tous. Mon nom est Gashi et je vais modérer la discussion avec Kim. Lors de notre sommet de mai, nous avons organisé des sessions francophones pour la communauté et nous espérons le faire à l'avenir, mais pas ce soir. L'événement de ce soir vise à explorer les intersections de la haine, à nous faire comprendre le travail qui se fait pour combattre la haine à Hamilton et ce que nous pouvons faire au niveau électoral.
So today's session is the second in our new speaker series, and it's called Creating a Community Response to Hate. The purpose of No Hate in the Hammer is to help make Hamilton an inclusive city where everyone is free of all forms of hate and feels a strong sense of belonging and community. We follow an anti-racism, anti-oppression framework. We advocate for the sharing of power and accountability in relationships, policies, our structures, and our practices. We also believe that our shared path forward is to work collaboratively, all parts of this community, on a coordinated community response to hate. The goal of this speaker series is to build on what we have already learned and to co-create a blueprint for action, including the creation of a toolkit for Hamilton. We're very excited to have all of you joining us here this afternoon to contribute to this important and challenging undertaking.
So today's session is called Reflecting on the Intersections of Hate. So as we know, Canada has a historical legacy of oppression, which spans so many social locations like class, gender, indigeneity, race, sexual orientation, faith, and many others. So we learned during our past May Summit from folks at the Anti-Hate Network that in most organized hate groups, prejudice exists on many levels and axes of hate. So many groups, for example, from what we learned, is that they use the internet as a vehicle to spread hate and radicalize followers. We've also seen this kind of on the ground as well.
One of the examples that we also note was a study that was conducted in the United States of the Ku Klux Klan websites. And major themes include an emphasis on obviously white solidarity, the cult of Aryan Christianity, Aryan Klan masculinity, and heteronormative nuclear family values. These dimensions intersect to create a complex picture of the Klan's self-proclaimed social supremacy. And actually, we can put that link into our chat if people are interested in having a look at that study.
So we see complex intersections of hate obviously playing out in Hamilton with respect to people who experience poverty, houselessness, people who use drugs, who experience mental health concerns, people who live in encampments. We also see expressions of hate manifested against Indigenous people regarding land claims, treaty rights, and cultural practices. And we also see how they kind of connect, right? There are Indigenous people or Black people who are also houseless and who use drugs or kind of live in encampments.
And so today, what we wanted to do was talk about some of those deeper intersections of hate in our community, and we wanted to better understand what hate looks like. We wanted to focus on solutions, and we're going to be talking also a little bit about our upcoming municipal and provincial elections, talking to our panelists about what they would like to see, what is important for us to understand in terms of questions that we might be asking our municipal and our provincial representatives, and really to start looking at truly building an inclusive community in Hamilton. So let's dive in. We're fortunate to have an incredible panel of community experts and citizens and engaged citizens to generate in this discussion with us this afternoon and to offer us their perspective. We're also interested in hearing from you, and please make use of the chat if you have questions that you would like to direct, and we will certainly attempt to do our best to circle around to all of those. And we look forward to some fruitful discussion this afternoon.
Yes, so before we begin, for some brief introductions. So joining us today is the recently appointed Executive Director of the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center, or HARC, Lyndon George. We have Caden from the Hamilton Trans Health Coalition. We also have Marcy McLevine from Keeping Six, and Kojo Dempte, the Executive Director of the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion. So welcome everyone. We're so honored to have you with us and to kind of really explore kind of issues in Hamilton. So our first question is for Lyndon George. So Lyndon, we know that HARC, the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center, is getting back on its feet with a community board of director and your recent hire as an executive director. And we know that people have been pushing for this for a long time. So can you give us an overview of HARC's purpose, what role it has in addressing hate in its community, its importance?
Thank you, Gachi. It's a pleasure to be with you all here today. The Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center is a center that provides advocacy, community resources, evidence-based research, and strategic support to residents experiencing racism and discrimination within our community. The center arose from a community need for resources to address issues in Hamilton related to racism and discrimination. And so the center was placed on pause in February 2019. And then I came on board in September, the first week in September, and I've had the opportunity to work with an incredible board here at HARC. We have 13 incredible members from our community who have stepped up, put their name forward, and are engaged in making sure that in our community, there's a resource center that has the capacity to do the work that I just mentioned HARC was envisioned to do. And so one of the first steps for us is finding a place where we can operate from. During the pandemic, many of us have been working from home, but this center is critically needed in the heart of our community where it can respond to issues when they arrive. And so we've very fortunate to have some great support at McMaster University. And we are now located at the continuing education location at 1 James Street North. And so for the past week, I've been working out of that location. So it's very much at the heart of our center, accessible to transit, and a location where individuals, when needed, can be able to reach out to us and say, here are our issues and where we're supporting. And also, we've updated our website to make sure that community understands where they can also reach us via email and get a sense of what the center is about. Revamp some of our social media to engage community a little bit more, and continuing to meet with stakeholders in the community and talk to them and hear what are the resources that they need. While we were on pause, there have been many other in our community stepping up and doing the advocacy work that HARC was intended to do, and we've been working and engaging with them as well. And some of them are here on the panel here tonight. And so we've also reached out to anchor institutions in our community to share what HARC is going to be up to and what we really need, not only financial support, but also a commitment from community members and institutions to also work with us to address racism. HARC can't do this alone, and it won't be solved overnight. But what we can do is be able to look at these resources and set a path forward on ways that we can work collaboratively with organizations to look at anti-oppression frameworks, talk about the intersectionality, and work with a path moving forward. And so a little bit around where we are at this stage is we are still trying to get ourselves back up and running and being able to make sure that we have a sustainable model for HARC to be able to succeed and have the support they need. We've received funding from the city, but it's going to take more than the commitment that we have now in order to ensure that we have a longevity and a plan forward to be able to do this work. As you may know, I'm the executive director, but I'm the executive director of one right now. And that's why it's so important that we continue to work collaboratively as organizations to help mitigate hate, to address racism in our community. And so that's a little bit about what I've been up to. And there's a lot more challenges, but also opportunities ahead. I look forward to meeting the community as we move forward with our incredible board and with so many of you who've tuned in here today.
Thanks so much, Lyndon. I think, we're all just so excited to have HARC up and running again and to have you in that leadership position to guide and steer the organization forward. So yes, once again, congratulations and thank you for taking up, that challenge in Hamilton. It is very needed. And the other thing that you touched on just is in terms of collaboration. And I think that really is that word that we're all using. It's the other C word as opposed to COVID that has come out of this pandemic as well. Organizations really working even closer together than they already were, and really looking at where the gaps are in our services and how some organizations can lend assistance and provide resources and share. But at the core of this also, as you mentioned, is that we need the sustainability of the social service sector, and for organizations and for nonprofits that so heavily rely on funding that often isn't that is transitional in nature and uncertain. There certainly is a need for us to be able to have that sustainability, and we can only do that through funding. So thank you for talking about that, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of your comments.
I think that this applies to everyone, and I really want to hear folks' thoughts on this. But we've known recently that Hamilton is the third most unaffordable city in North America. So I know that Keeping Six, for example, has done a lot of work on this. So Marcy, what does this mean in terms of the manifestation of hate? What does it mean, when we decide to fight against kind of like oppression and hate? How does like the unaffordable kind of housing market also qualify as like something that is hateful and oppressive? And what can we do about that?
That is a big question. I'll just go back and start with like Kim's first question and kind of explain who I am and what I do, kind of thing, for those that don't know me. I don't know who's all watching. I've met most of the people on this call. So I am the project outreach coordinator for Keeping Six. I also wear other hats in the community with different organizations, and sit at different tables. And a majority of my work is focused, again, on people deprived of housing. We choose not to call them homeless. It's actually, they're just deprived of something that they should be offered. And also with people that use substances, or people that used to use substances, or care about people that use substances. And all of the people I work with, whether it's people actively using, or people that are deprived of housing, or people supporting people deprived of housing, or people supporting those that use substances, are stigmatized and hated, for lack of a better word. Some say they're misunderstood, but I think hatred, although it happens in big groups and online and in big, huge things, can also look really, really small. Hatred can be the sharing of not accurate information, which we have seen, right? Hatred can be the denial of facts, where people say there's space for everyone, but really there's not. And we see that and we fight it, and people are like, well, who do you believe, right? Do you believe the people that don't have a place to go, or do you believe the people paid lots of money to create those places? And I don't know if that makes sense, but misinformation is hatred. The fact that Hamilton, the city we live in, is like the third poorest place and has one of the highest overdose rates, and somebody can correct me, but I'm pretty sure we have the highest rate in Ontario, or we did recently. And nobody wants to do anything about it other than push people further away, or put up signs in neighborhoods to not allow CTSs to be built, right? Like, it's that kind of stuff. The affordable housing being listed as still, like, I think, and I might have the numbers wrong, I'm not great with numbers, I'm better with people and relationships, but I think the city has determined affordable housing to be about $1,000 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment, and no income support system gives that. So that's what that looks like, right? It looks like pushing people out. It looks like taking down encampments where there's nowhere for people to go. It looks like what we see in the news, that people paid by the city are telling people to go into the woods. Hatred looks like, I just don't want to see you, right? I can pretend I'm not against you, but I am really, because if you don't want to see something, it normally means you're against it, right? And the work I do day in and day out is just show up with people, right? And sit with them. When I was asked by encampment residents, I think when the decision came from the court, and I was sitting with some people, and they're like, so what are they going to give me? Like, what are they going to offer me when they take my tent away? And I looked at them and said, possibly nothing. And that's what hatred looks like. It looks like the unwillingness to support someone, in my mind. There's also like the big things, and there's the media campaigns and smear campaigns, and there's rhetoric and mudslinging towards groups that support people. I know groups and people that support those in encampments and those unhoused and those that use substances that are called out and called horrible things and like told that we're in the wrong and we shouldn't be doing this and we create homelessness. I think that's been said about our group quite a few times, that we've like fabricated homelessness. And that's what hatred is. And what can be done about it? I don't know if there's an answer. I think we're in a city, and this is just my opinion, I'm not speaking for my entire group, but we're in a city that doesn't want to do anything about it other than take it away, right? So we can't solve something if the people in leadership and the people at decision-making tables choose to ignore it, right? There was a whole bunch of people that delegated, and I want to say all those delegations meant something, right? I want to say that they're going to make a difference, but the sad reality is I don't believe they will. I believe budget's still going to come back to like developers and LRT, which is great, and the Grey Cup, right? Like it's, I don't know how else to explain it other than if people could just spend time with people, things would be a lot different. If the people that are like chastising those deprived of housing, if the businesses that don't want a CTS beside them got to know people that would utilize that service, if people that are against encampments spent time in an encampment, like not living there, but just interacting. One really quick story, we have a volunteer that literally decorates like lunch bags for us. She's been doing it for a year, once a week. And a couple of weeks ago, she messaged me and she's like, I made a bunch of cabbage rolls because it's cold. Can you bring them to this encampment near my house? Because she had never walked in one, right? Like she'd always just like walked past it, but I'm like, I can't, but you could just go. And she's like, so how do I do that? I'm like, just go and say, here's some food. And she went and formed like relationships with people. And a week later, she went in there and there was city trucks and police and she phoned me crying, and she's an 81-year-old grandmother. And she's like, what can I do to stop this from happening? She's like, because in that park, people are still playing, kids are still playing, people are still using the park, and people are living and they coexist. Why doesn't the city want to see that, right? Why don't the people that are taking these tents down look over and see the kids playing? Because it's still a park whether there's a tent there or not. And I hope that answered the question. If not, you could just like redirect me. But...
No, that was great. That definitely answered the question. Kojo and then Lyndon, I'm going to ask you the same question that Kim did. So what issues have you been seeing on the ground in your communities? And also feel free to comment on anything else that has been said. So Kojo?
Yes. So Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion, quick history lesson. So after September 9th attacks here in Hamilton, an individual burnt down Hindu Samaj temple thinking it was a mosque. And after that incident, community leaders, civic leaders came together to say, hey, we need to start addressing the issue of hate, Islamophobia, xenophobia, and other forms of discrimination and prejudice. And that's how HCCI was formed. And so since then, we've been doing this work. Since I joined HCCI, there are a number of things that we've been trying to do. So when we talk about hate generally, vis-a-vis hate crimes, hate incidents, Canada does not have a consistent way of tracking hate. So as it stands right now, if you want to find hate crimes and hate incidents that happen across the country, it's dependent on police departments to report that to StatsCan, and then StatsCan does their analysis and then they put it out. So what does that mean? Well, that means that as a community, we do not have the answers, but as a community, we do experience the hate. So I always give the example: if you're walking down the street and a racial slur is used, and other slurs are used, that is a hate crime. We all know it, that's a hate crime or a hate incident. But then when you go and report it to the police, if criminality is not attached to the incident, they can't do anything, right? That is the law. So that means that our experiences, right, Black religious communities, towards LGBTQ communities, the Jewish community, all the populations that experience hate on a daily basis, we're experiencing this hate and nothing is being done, right? For those in Hamilton, we had yellow vests and people filled with hate congregating in front of City Hall for over a year, right? Over a year, and nothing was done. But yet, when, as Marcia said, people deprived of housing are looking for a place to just be, then we take 6 trucks, 4 police cars, take their belongings and toss it in the trash and tell them to go up into the mountains. But when people are actively standing in front of a municipal government saying things that we would never even let children say, nothing can be done, right? So this is the impact of hate. And I think it was Caden that mentioned, we're also seeing the multi-layered approach, right? You have on one side politicians that do not want to address it, but then when a family of 4 is murdered on an afternoon, then everybody rushes to say we denounce hate, but yet they are not willing to spend an ounce on the preventative measures that we should be undertaking, right? And this hate that we are talking about, Caden mentioned the Mapping the Void report. You know, that report was an extensive report, that talked about the hate, that talked about health barriers, and yet no investments, nothing. We always leave it to community members to do the heavy lifting, and yet we have the least amount of resources, right? So let me, and I'll finish. I want to be direct and clear because I don't want to speak in abstract. So right now, the city of Hamilton that has a 1 billion operating expenditure, right? It's not even going to invest in any of those things, right? They're not, the Just Recovery Policy document with over 150 recommendations ask them to invest in towards LGBTQ communities. That hasn't been done. Invest in issues related to disability justice. That hasn't been done. Even snow clearing, right? Snow clearing to keep seniors, mothers, and the general public safe during winter. That was, reduced to a pilot project. So you have all of these culminating things that are actively saying to people that we do not want you and we cannot help you, right? And so that's the climate that we're in, that's fostering hate, that's allowing for political decisions to be made. And the impact on people is they are left behind, they have no support. And then the same community organizations that are there day in, day out are the ones that are penalized, told that they are activists, told that they are radicals, and they don't provide any funding. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing on the daily.
Yeah, just to pick up from where Kojo, left off there, which I think was to really summarize the frustrations and the realities in our community when it comes to racism and the lack of action. I think, there's from when we're encountering racism in the community, we're saying, look, there are societal issues and there are institutional issues. We are often turning to these institutions to reform and to address and to and respond to them in a way that prevents it from happening again. And sometimes that takes money, but most of all, it takes effort. And there's a lack of effort at times at senior levels to understand, but then to set the course towards change. And I think for me in this new role, it's kind of looking at it and saying, if we are coming here to the table and we're being invited to be in the rooms, we are coming here also to have conversations about how we can transform these systems in an equitable way. And what often is, it's a discussion that just endlessly goes on, but it needs to lead to action. It needs to lead to the kind of tangible changes that we can turn to and say that these aren't just exercises, that they are meant to change the conversation in a positive way. And I think, when individuals become frustrated and they no longer see a point in going to council or to going to their elected official or to a community organization that's been set up there to support them, and they start to lose faith in it, you see it and it's frustrating, but you start to understand it when the systems aren't recognizing that the warning bells are there. when we talk about the yellow vesters in front of City Hall, it's through community advocacy that individuals speak up and pushes elected officials to do more and to hold spaces accountable. And so, this isn't going to be done individually, one-on-one, but there needs to be individuals in the room who are committed to implementing these changes. And if not, then we run the risk of really undermining these democratic processes that are there, that we often are told to turn to, whether it be the court system that says, just wait for justice, and then you turn to it and it becomes an injustice, or, go to the ballot box and, have your say, and then you go and you realize here that, through other mechanisms of donation, that your vote has been, outweighed by developers and other individuals who have a different strategy and plan to move you systemically out of your neighborhood through gentrification. Like these rules, there's an imbalance here. And I think that there's a broader conversation in how these societal issues are impacting individuals and how it plays out to individuals no longer being able to have faith in the system.
If I can jump in, or Coach Joe, do you want to go ahead, or do you mind if I jump in? That both of you have brought up some pretty big things, right? And I get invited to tables on a regular basis. I was on one for months that dealt with encampments, and I left that table, and I didn't leave the table because I didn't want to be at a table. I left the table because we would have meetings and talk about things, and then the actions taken by the people at that table, or some of the people at the table, would be the opposite of what we talked about. I was at one meeting where a result to deal with someone that was unhoused, that was like an issue, was like, well, let's see what happens, right? Like, let's get to him to a point where he can get help. He can be like institutionalized pretty much, and then we can like clear his stuff. And it was like, okay, no, like, how is that a thing? And a lot of the talk around encampments and around substance use and around substance use disorder and mental health is, but there's programs, right? A lot of stuff around substance use in the healthcare sector, in society, and we've criminalized an illness. There's no other illness outside of substance use disorder that I think you get arrested and charged for, right? Like, and we're like, hey, just abstain, or there's a shelter bed, so you need to take it. And that is talk that doesn't work. I've been on
Marcy, I think we may have lost your audio.
Yes, that stuff happens in encampments too, but people have the right to choose where they are. And I think I'm paused because my internet connection's unstable. Can you guys hear me still? All right.
We can hear you now.
Perfect. And like, when you talk about decision makers and trusting the democratic process, a lot of people probably know that there's been two court cases in the past year and a bit around encampments and houselessness in Hamilton. There's an injunction last year that lasted a few months, and we came to the table and negotiated, and then the city took that negotiation, which wasn't perfect and wasn't always great, but they decided to just throw it out, which is well within their right, I guess. But prior to any court case, we reached out and asked the city to meet. We asked the councillor for Ward 2, where a lot of these encampments were, and a lot of the focus was on the encampments in Ward 2, just so everybody knows there is encampments all across the city. I live in the West Mountain. There's people that live outside here, and they're not bothered by the police. I go see them on a regular basis, and they're like, the cops haven't been here. But when you have a ward where that stuff is, and we reach out to talk to the councillor of that ward and say, like, let's sit, come to the table, let's sit, let's hash this out, kind of thing. And they say they'll get back to us, and then we ask them a month later and they still haven't responded. And it's been, I'm pretty sure they haven't, and it's been since May of 2020, right? So the democratic process is great. And I think leading up to elections, people are really engaged, and then people get elected and they forget what they're engaged in sometimes. That's not true for everybody. There's some amazing people that go to bat and come to meetings and show up. And it's just hard, right? It's hard. I talk to encampment residents all the time, and they read in the paper that politicians care about them, and they're like, but they have never come to meet me. The mayor says he cares, but he's never shaken my hand, right? He's never hugged me, like all the things politicians do with their developer friends, they don't do with those deprived of housing, right? When it comes down to it, and that's what hate looks like. Hatred can be as simple as I care more about money and buildings and infrastructure and lining pockets than I do of shaking hands and meeting people. But I can't say that out loud, so I'll make it look this way, and I'll open more shelter beds, right? And then we'll try to force people in the shelter. But the fact of the matter is, no matter how many shelter beds you open, today there was people in the encampment that were cleared out and had absolutely nowhere to go. But you know what they weren't allowed to do? Stay where they were. You know, that's me. Go ahead, Coach O. Sorry. I get passionate about this stuff.
Yeah, I wanted to build upon what you just said. And I like giving examples, because sometimes when we speak, people think we're speaking because we don't know. Everyone tells us this is not how the process works. Well, let's give the example. You know, on Monday was public budget delegation day, and big shout outs to Hamilton Encampment Support Network. They had a delegation at a park where residents at the park spoke. They spoke for 5 minutes. These are residents that they themselves have said, we're kicking you out of the parks and we're asking city park officials to throw your tent and belongings into the trash. Everybody was moved. Everybody listened attentively. Then the next day, there was an urban boundary discussion about affordable housing. But yet the affordable housing they are talking about is an average of $800,000. People have already mentioned Hamilton is the least affordable place to live in the whole of North America, not Canada, North America, right? And one individual, I'm not going to mention names, you know, keeping it clean. One individual that builds houses in Hamilton, the mayor said, can we extend the 5 minutes because developers have been attacked during this discussion around urban boundary. And when you hear that, I was at Ferguson, the first iteration at Ferguson, where there were over lots of tents. It was a cold, rainy day. I remember that. I will never forget that day. Cold, rainy day. It's raining, it's cold, it's freezing, and the city took every one of those tents down. And then went to First Ontario as well, took every one of those tents down. So you tell me, are residents in parks not attacked? And yet we're not giving them the opportunity to speak to the experiences that they have, right? So this is what is happening. And then you find out that some of the developers, and this is what Marcy was talking about, some of the developers that spoke contributed money to the councillors and the mayor. And I'm not speaking out of 10 here. You can go to the city of Hamilton's website to 2018. There's a list of all the names of people that give money to every person that run, right? So when you see stuff like that, it begs to in my mind, I'm like, you know, are they really there to ensure that they are solving the issues? And the last thing I'll say that makes the democratic process very challenging is the judge. And I'm paraphrasing here. I don't have the whole document in front of me. He said, I cannot tell the city what to do. It is the job of politicians, policymakers, what have you, housing advocates, to come up with a solution, right? So when you read something like that and then you see that even the city councillors are not coming up with a solution, then what are we doing? What are we doing? And the same thing applies for hate, racism, Islamophobia, all these things that we are all talking about here today.
Thank you. I think that discussion really covered so much in such depth. So thinking about how everything intersects. It's not just about, we can't isolate racism from the oppression that people feel when they are living on a low income or without homes. We have to look at it all together. So thank you all for that rich discussion. I'd like to focus in a little bit on some of the things that are happening in terms of our health system and how that can lead to oppression as well. And we know that there are a lot of existing systems that discriminate, and the healthcare system is one of them, and which has been documented, for many, many years. It's an important one for our community.
So, are you seeing any action to improve how healthcare institutions and systems serve your communities? Like, has work been done around it? Is there anything else that we should expect for them?
If it's okay if I jump in, awesome. So people that know my story or have like spoken with me or met me know that healthcare used to be the bane of my existence. A lot of the trauma I experienced, both as a child and adult, came at the hands of healthcare officials, whether it be doctors, nurses, paramedics, all that stuff, which goes with being a 11-year-old that does morphine, I guess, but it is what it is. But a lot of what I see today, and I think the question is like, what progress have you seen? And before I can talk about progress, I need to talk about some of the stuff that's the same. And it's the same in like housing and shelter services as it is in healthcare. So I was a unhoused, substance addicted sufferer of many mental health diagnoses when I was like 12 and 13. And as a youth and a child, people wanted to help you, and people went out of their way to like make sure you had shelter and make sure you had support. And then when I was 17, it was still going on, and people wanted to like help me get housed and help me like find solutions and all that stuff. And then that was in November, and I turned 18 in November. Like the day I turned 18, the people that were saying, let me help you, were now saying, why are you still out here? And I think that's what hatred looks like, right? Like when our compassion turns to questioning, it becomes a bigger thing. But with healthcare, I was formed a hospital because people were uncomfortable with my behavior. Being formed a hospital didn't change my behavior. I was in a hospital and I was restricted to a bed and to a ward, and they took my clothes and they gave me like a little gown and slippers and lots of medication. And in 72 hours or 30 days or 15 days, whatever my form was up, they're like, hey, have a nice life. And there was no follow-up, right? And I still see that happening to people. I see people
I think Marcy seems to be experiencing some internet connections. Marcy? We're not hearing your audio. Oh,
okay. So
you're back again.
Perfect. Yeah, sorry, my internet connection's unstable like a lot of my life. So I'm not totally against forming people if the need is there, but sometimes we do it because it's easier to form someone than support them. I see in healthcare, there's still stigma around substance use. There's definitely stigma around people deprived of housing. Sometimes people want to get warm and they go into an emergency room and they just want to sit, and they're not allowed to sit because, once again, it's not okay, right? I see people trying. I see systems trying to support people's substance use more. There's CTSs coming up. There's hospital workers that have the capacity building team, or like the addictions team. There's Shelter Health Network that operates clinics inside shelters. HamSmart, I am not a doctor, but a lot of my coworkers are medical field folks, and they go to encampments and they bring vaccines and they bring healthcare and just support people and meet them in tents or on the side of the road or in their house, right? Because walking into a hospital is hard sometimes if you've had negative experiences, right? Some of the people we work with, Kaden, are trans and BIPOC folks, right? And it's a whole different situation that I'm not going to pretend I understand. And I think it's a disservice to say I understand what someone's going through when I don't understand and haven't experienced it. But every step forward in regards to substance use and substance use policy in hospital, I sit at a table that's discussing substance use policy at hospital level. And it's like, okay, so we're going to talk about this and we're going to talk about this and we're going to talk about this. And one day, someday, we don't know when that day is, it'll be different, right? And we do mapping and we do case studies and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, people still are hurt in hospitals and people still don't want to go, right? But there's room. There's the addictions team. There's people that support. There's peer workers in some hospitals, and some hospital programs and some research programs, and there's more conversation. Sometimes I get what Lyndon said earlier. Sometimes it gets frustrating just being at tables. I go through that on a regular basis. There's a lot of tokenism happening with, especially now with like people with lived experience with like homelessness or mental health or substance use. And sometimes I'm the one that's at that table and I'm the only person that's been deprived of housing talking about housing, and it's just hard, but there's slow progress being made. And I think the more we have these conversations and the more people buy in, the more change will come. I don't know if that made sense, but.
It did. Thank you, Marcy. Kojo and or Lyndon, would you like to just weigh in terms of healthcare and how that can be oppressive for members of our community?
So on the question with regards to institutions and healthcare institutions and how they're improving and what they're doing, I just wanted to maybe just answer that one a little bit. And oftentimes, I get the sense that there are individuals in the system who are working to do what they can, and we'll try and be those advocates within. And I see that a lot now in healthcare. But it goes back to the earlier conversation around the institutional challenges that are there. And so you're kind of seeing this a need in the healthcare system. And Kojo and Dr. Emil Joseph came up very early on and talked about during COVID, especially around the data collection. You saw today, if you looked at Toronto, at the Hamilton Spectator today, there was a discussion around data collection around COVID deaths and how to use that data appropriately and how it was being registered. And there was a bit of back and forth in the article if you looked at it, and it said, how are they recording it? But there's a quote that says, like, if this information isn't correct, essentially what you're saying is you're undermining, people need to have faith in public health in order for this information to be correct, so that public health can be an effective tool in our community. The quote is much better than what I just said, but the point that I'm trying to make here is around how these institutions interact with our communities and the trust that has to be formed. And I think individuals in our community and our healthcare system, we're doing a really good job of saying, look, we recognize the challenges and here's what we can do to help, and bringing individuals and organizations to come and mitigate those issues in these institutions. But it takes it, you have to do it up and down. It just can't be one or two individuals trying to make holistic changes in an organization. And so I would say that there needs to be a pause in a way to say that they positively reflect and understand, but then it has to have the resources and the money in order to meet these challenges. We see that in public health, that this was an opportunity for individuals during COVID to say, look, we need more people. We don't just need patient ambassadors. We need to re-envision and bring back in and do more. I don't think that they've done that yet. And I think that's something that still needs to happen. And it can't be when people retire and move on and then we get new blood. It has to be in these critical moments where you've started to critically analyze it and say, this is where we can improve on, and not marginalize the voices that are trying to hold them accountable. Oftentimes that's what happens. You say something's wrong, everyone's like, you're just, you're the problem. And then those people leave, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, now here's an opportunity to reform. That's the same old system of change, and we've got to move past that. And if COVID's not the moment, I don't know when is. And so I'm a little bit you know, in my new role, I want to be as optimistic as I can be. But I also am watching to see, you know, in the time that we have, how authentic people are being in the roles that they are when they invite us into these rooms now. Because I'm no longer, you know, just the patient advisor. I'm now sitting across saying, no, there's accountability and there's resources. And how are you taking that to become much more engaged in our community?
Yeah, you know, and I'll follow up with Lyndon, because I know Lyndon was one of the folks that spoke about reforming the membership at the Board of Health. And that brings me to, I think Gashi is sharing it with everyone, a report that was done by Ontario Health and Wellesley Institute. And, you know, in the report, it says the things that we were saying during the height of COVID, that racialized populations, low income populations, people, vulnerable populations were going to be at high risk of COVID. And, you know, during that time, we asked public health, collect data, socioeconomic data, race data, to inform the COVID response. They said no. And in the report that we just shared, the same thing was asked of Ontario Health. And they only started collecting the data in June of 2020, right? And so now our whole COVID response is all over the place, right? There's no actual structural way of saying these are how we are addressing the inequities that we are seeing, right? So then what ends up happening is that they'll call Lyndon on a table, they'll call me on a table, Gashi on a table, Caden on a table, Marcy on a table, Kim Martin on a table, and we voice our opinions, and it's never heard. The solutions have been laid out. I think it's time that we just started. One of the recommendations from the report is that, you know, socioeconomic race-based data should be linked with everybody's health card, right? That's a quick one. I don't know how we haven't done that. Obviously, there might be some issues related to what Caden mentioned, right? But these are things that we can do, but it seems like we are never doing it. And, you know, Lyndon said we are always in that, you know, Bob Marley says that we're always in a rat race. We're chasing our tail over and over and over again. The last comment I'll make, and this goes for myself, you know, I remember hearing a talk by Stokely Carmichael, civil rights leader, who said, you know, some of the changes we are asking for, sometimes we talk about it from a moral point of view as opposed to a political point of view, right? Sometimes if you can't prove your morality to someone, as Marcy said, we have people living in tents and we're throwing their belongings away. That's immoral, but we're doing it anyway. So now it becomes a political decision. Are we going to have people that are politically invested that are going to make the change? And some of the things that we are mentioning here speaks to that. The bill that the MPP is putting forward, right? Other things that we're seeing, there's going to be provincial municipal elections next year. We already had a federal election. So sometimes too, the answers lie in the political will. And that's why, at least for HCCI's perspective, we are always like, we need people to be civically engaged. We need community participation. We need to show up for people. So whether it's Ham Smart, whether it's Keeping Six, whether it's Hamilton Encampment Support Network, whether it's HAC, we are always supporting all of these organizations, whether it's the Legal Clinic, shout out to the Legal Clinic, and SPLC. We are always trying to connect the issues and get people to mobilize and understand that we're really talking about political decisions that have real life impact on people.
If I can jump in one more time, again, I don't want to like monopolize. And hopefully my internet doesn't cut out for like the 90th time during this hour. I love what Kojo you're saying. Like, At HamSmart, we totally believe healthcare, as most things, is a political thing. And again, I'm speaking for myself and not the whole group, although I think they agree with me. They'll tell me later if they see this. But it comes down to, and I want to start by saying I'm not against healthcare. I do think that there's purpose behind it. And I do see progress. I've spoke at an event, I think recently with Lyndon, I believe it was not that long ago, and shared like my experience and that it has progressed, right? And it is political and it is about getting the right people in. And I think at all levels, whether it's shelter service or hospitals or any kind of social service agency, the higher up you get, the more political it can become. And that's why I kind of like it down where I am, because I can sit at those tables and just walk away when I need to walk away, right? And it comes down to like, we advocate wholeheartedly, and a lot of groups do, but we understand also at HamSmart, and I see it, and I think my coworkers do, that there's power with titles, right? There's position with titles. I delegated with other members of my group and to the I forget what group it was, some city group about encampments, and nobody asked me a question, but they asked the doctors questions and they asked the other people questions, right? Because again, I'm just a person that's lived outside, not a person that makes decisions for people that live outside. But it comes down to using that, right? And we have people that advocate. Caden and your group advocates for trans folks, and Lyndon, Kojo advocate for like racialized and stigmatized people. And I work a lot with people deprived of housing and people that use substances, and I advocate. And the hospital was going to discharge someone recently to the street because their time was up. They were medically cleared and whatever. And I fought with, like, I didn't fight with them. Fighting is like a harsh word, but like I kept saying, I'm like, no, like you do this person is just going to be back and their situation's just going to be worse. Like, what is the point of the revolving door, right? Hospitals have a revolving door system. Criminal justice system definitely has a revolving door. The substance use system, when we push for abstinence, when a person's not at a place that abstinence is a goal or even possible, is a revolving door. I've gone to treatment 15 times, right? The first 14, I did not change my life, but I went and I was part of their statistics and I got a little checkbox thing, right? And it comes down to the people that don't have someone advocating for them. What if I wasn't there, or somebody wasn't there for the person that the hospital was going to discharge to the road, right? They'd be on the road. What about the people in encampments that nobody makes calls for? Like, we email the city on a regular basis saying, hey, this person has no options. Can you help? Right? And we bug them. Like, we email them repeatedly, and people are like, oh, well, see that they got in. And I'm like, well, what if we weren't there? What if HESM wasn't there? What if Lyndon and Kojo and Caden weren't there? What if the legal clinic never decided to go to court, right? Whatever the result of that court case is, and whatever the judge said, and I have my opinions, which I'll keep out of this because it's gonna like blow up a whole bunch of things, and I'm gonna call out people that I probably don't need to, right? Because everybody knows their own stuff. Everybody knows what they tweet and what they do, and it's up to them if those two things match, right? For me, I try to live transparently. What I say in these rooms, at tables, out online is how I live my life, and that's why I can say it, right? But there needs, having someone advocate for you shouldn't be the only way you get help. People's voice should be able to stand on its own, and until it does, we're always going to face this, right? We're always going to have hatred and gentrification and colonization until people are willing to listen to the people speaking and the people experiencing stuff, and not look for freaking experts all the time. Because the person that's an expert in the situation is the person that's in the situation, whether we want to see it or not. And I'm not perfect. I'm not saying I am in any way.
I'm sorry, Marcy, you seem to have cut out again. So I must be having some issues with connectivity there.
Okay, I'll repeat that last line and then I'll be quiet, because I think that's my cue to shut up when that comes up. It's like the internet saying, just be quiet, Marcy. But like in court documents, and they're public and they've been shared, I think, everywhere, like people's affidavits and what people have said. And if you want to see it, I think somewhere there's a link to like the whole court thing. It's long and it's a lot, but if you want to read 78 pages, go ahead. The long and the short of it, and I really, really hope that the people I work with are okay with this, but I'm just going to say it and deal with it after, because sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness than ask for allowance. But Kojo's laughing at me. I love it. But when I read in these things and in these affidavits, organizations saying that Keeping Six and Hamsmart don't have standards, or that we want people outside, and it's been in the news before that I said we fabricated homelessness, and I think they tried to make it sound like I went door to door personally with a tent and said, hey, leave your condo, here's a $60 tent, go live outside. That has not happened. I've lived outside a lot of my life. Never once did I want to be out there. And yeah, when I lived outside, there were shelter beds available. But what happened in the shelter, I wasn't willing to accept at that time. But when these affidavits are written and people are saying this and people are like, oh, and then they go on Twitter and they're like, my heart breaks that people are outside, but you wrote a paper for the city so that they can displace people outside. And when you say that, like my organizations are not mine, I don't own them, but the organizations I work with have no standards. And I read that as I sit beside someone your organization kicked out because of substance use, because of mental health, or there just wasn't space. It breaks my freaking heart, right? And it keeps me stuck in this, like, why keep going? But then I sit with that person and they're like, thanks for showing up. And so I show up. End rant.
Thank you. The last thing I heard of that was, and that's why I show up. And I think that, also just kind of encapsulates a lot of what we've been talking about, is we need to show up for each other as community. We need to work together and humanize, what we're experiencing. That we're not talking about numbers, we're talking about human lives. We're just a little bit before 6 o'clock. I want to give everyone just a quick opportunity. And when I mean quick, I will give you like 30 seconds, because I want to hear from you about what do you want to see? What do you want to see either municipally or provincially in this next election? What would be one thing, one difference that you would like to see that would make an impact in terms of changing our landscape, in terms of hate and oppression that people are experiencing, and how that is increasing? What can we do? What do you want to see your elected officials do? What's one thing? And I'm going to make you be quick. So I'm going to start with you, Lyndon. What's one thing that you would like to see?
Well, I think when it comes to the intersectionality of it all, for me, it is, we have the LRT. Metrolinx have bought a lot of the property along that route. I think there's something like 90 properties that have been purchased that has now been paid by, the people of Ontario. That needs to be dedicated to real affordable housing. I would call on the province now and the city to take that property and dedicate it all to affordable housing, put it into a land trust, and allow the community to make a decision over that property, not developers. That is a critical thing. We're not going to get that in our lifetime again, where municipalities have already bought the property. We need that property.
Thank you for being succinct, Lyndon. Wonderful. Kojo, one thing on your list.
The municipality should expropriate land and build social cooperative housing at rates that allow for people to live there without any rent, without any forcible rent. That's what should happen.
Thanks, Kojo. Marcy, one thing.
Okay. Municipally, anybody that's running for office, meet people that are outside and meet people that you're going to affect by your choices and your words. And provincially, stop thinking there's only one solution towards the treatment of substance use disorder, except that there's many options for the treatment of substance use disorder as there are for any other illness.
Thank you.
So yes, thank you to all the panelists for taking the time to join us today. Thank you, Marcy. Thanks, Lyndon, Kojo, and Kaden. I really, and we could honestly, truly appreciate your insights and the great and important and integral work that you do in this community. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be here.
We also wanted to acknowledge and thank the U.S. Embassy's Democracy, Diversity, and Human Rights virtual program grant for providing financial support for this speaker series. We thank the people that have attended online. We've had quite a few attendees this afternoon. We would invite you all to check out the No Hate in the Hammer website for more information and how to join the coalition. Yashi?
Yes, so we also will be hosting another session sometime actually in January, where we'll be focusing more specifically on the city, and the city is like the institution of the city, and kind of its efforts and its the work that it's doing internally to kind of address hate. And so, yeah, we'll talk about how No Hate in the Hammer supports and influences this work and how it fits into the broader coordinated community response that is needed.
And at No Hate in the Hammer, we really do believe that allies, advocates, and change makers can make a difference. And it's important that we continue to listen, to learn, and to act. We hope today's discussion will lead you to act and to help create a Hamilton where inclusion and acceptance are experienced by all. Thank you everyone for attending, and good night. Merci et bon.